Welcome to a Gentleman's Review. I'm Art Hampton. I'm your host, bringing you the news that the mainstream propaganda does not address. And today, Brooke has come back to join us again to continue this review of Theonomy or a critique of Theonomy by Sam Waldron and Tom Hicks. And so we left off on page 40, where Sam, or Dr. Waldron, is discussing the civil authorities. How should civil authorities function in his Gentile, time of the Gentiles, or church age? And so there's a few things that I wanted to discuss here. He says, and I quote, I'm going to quote the whole thing and then I'll address it. So, on page 40, quote, God is no longer the unique king of any civil entity. No nation is now mandated to adhere to a divinely revealed civil order. While the moral principles enshrined in the laws of the Old Covenant remain authoritative, no nation is bound to the detailed civil order of the Old Testament Israel. One must also conclude that no longer are the church and state a united entity. The redeemed community no longer has a civil statute. Now, there are 5 things there that I want to point out. The first one, God is no longer the unique king of any civil entity. I mean, Matthew 28, all authority has been given to me. The whole world is his. He says, no nation is now mandated to adhere to a divinely revealed civil order. Okay. So as Christians, we should establish a civil government not based off of the law of God. Now, it's interesting because the next sentence he backtracks. While the moral principles enshrined in the laws of the Old Covenant remain authoritative, no nation is bound to the detailed civil order of the Old Testament Israel. If they remain authoritative today, but we don't need to do them, in what way are they authoritative? That if they remain authoritative, should we do them or not? Well, he says no. Well, then they're not authoritative. That's basically just double talk. Or if you want to say they're authoritative in principle, in what way, I would ask him, in what way are they authoritative if we don't have to do what they tell us to do? Or the principle of what they say?
Well, I think he might be missing the moral aspect of the judicial law, so that's why he says that.
That's fair. That's fair. Next time I go to Kentucky, I'll see if I can meet with him again. He was out of the country last time. So he also goes on to say, one must also conclude that no longer are church and state a united entity. The church and the state have never been a united entity.
Right.
Aaron and Moses. That is just false. He also says the redeemed community is no longer a civil structure. Well, first of all, where does that come from? And secondly, king is the head of a civil structure. If Christ is king, that would make him the king of a civil structure. But that was just one paragraph. I mean, that was a lot to unpack out of that.
Well, it actually reminded me of a psalm I just pulled up. I'll read the first 8 verses, if that's okay. It's Psalm 47. This is how it describes God. It says, Psalm 47, the ESV, it says, clap your hands, all peoples, shout to God with loud songs of joy. For the Lord, the Most High, is to be feared, a great king over all the earth. He subdued peoples under us and nations under our feet. You chose our heritage for us, the pride of Jacob whom he loves. God has gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. Sing praises to God, sing praises. Sing praises to our King, sing praises. For God is the King of all the earth, sing praises with a psalm. God reigns over the nations, God sits on his holy throne. So that psalm, just from base reading of the text, seems to be saying God is king over all the earth. Sing praises to him. So there you go.
I don't. Once I became a post millennial, all the Psalms started making sense. I don't see how you can read the Psalms and not understand them as a post millennial.
Or an optimistic amillennial.
Oh, okay. A soft boiled post millennialist. So on page 41, he goes on to say the divine establishment of the Gentile civil authorities. So he goes on to explain. He says also, and I quote, "It is clear that this fact implies the idea that Gentile authorities are responsible to God to owe him obedience as civil authorities." Well, my goodness, how do they owe God civil obedience without the law of God?
What's the standard?
What is the standard? And he doesn't go on, he doesn't explain this. If not the law of God, then what? But that makes absolutely no sense. So they attack theonomy, and then they say, oh, but, okay, you attack theonomy, you attack the law of God, but what is the answer? And I haven't found anybody, Ligon Duncan, Sam Waldron, Tom Hicks, nobody gives me an answer as to what we should do. How should we establish civil government? It's a lot of double talk, and it's a lot of cake, because they try to have it, and they try to eat it too.
So I think the thing is knowing people who they might be more premillennial eschatology, or they hold the two kingdoms. When I hear them talk about, okay, what do you do now as a Christian living in society? They would say almost the same thing that a post-mill or Christian nationalist or whatever term you want to use would say. They would say, okay, live as salt and light as a Christian, seek to influence government, seek to influence your church, the spear. So they're coming to the same, some of them are coming to the same application, but not like, how are they coming to that would be the question. So.
That is the show your work, basically, like you're in math class in middle school. Show your work. Well, I don't know.
So practically, they would live the same way. It's just, how is your theology isn't necessarily maybe in line with your practice.
I would agree with that 100%. So on page 42, Waldron goes on, "This is not to be read as permission to ignore or be indifferent to civil righteousness insofar as it is the ability to enhance it." So what he's saying we need to do, we shouldn't be indifferent to the civil magistrates. What we need to do is enhance it. But without the law of God, how do we enhance it? There again is the same question. He's saying don't ignore it. Don't be indifferent to it. So you're exactly right. He's coming to biblical conclusions, but he's doing it in a very, very roundabout way. His theology is in the way of his biblical conclusions. It's like trying to ride a bike and not pumping up your tires. He also says the true hope of the people of God is in the reestablishment of the theocratic kingdom. And I thought the true hope of God was in the gospel.
Sure. Maybe he's referring to like the new heavens and the new earth. Like, our hope is that, yes, in the gospel, and it concludes with Christ coming back and establishing his perfect kingdom forever. So But
And he
again, I haven't read the
says,
book, so that's my interpretation.
we'll add this to your list.
I have a long reading list. I have a lot of books back there.
Need to get at it. I'll show you my reading list. It's a lot bigger.
Probably.
I just got a bunch of books in today, and most of them made the reading list. All right. So he goes on. He says the central importance of the church for the work of the kingdom. Okay, and I'm gonna make a quote because there's 4 different things I want to address, or 5 different things I want to address in this quote. Okay, so I'm just gonna quote him, and then we'll go through it piece by piece again. This is on page 43, discussing the central importance of the church for the work of the kingdom. And I quote, "The theocratic kingdom is present only in the redemptive task of the church, not in the conservative task of the state. Therefore, labor for the kingdom must not place an equal importance on ecclesiastical and civil matters. The dominion mandate must not be set alongside the Great Commission as its equal, nor may it be seen as its real content. The church and its task is the exclusive focus of the kingdom endeavor in this age. The theocratic kingdom is now present, not in visible or political form, but in spiritual and ecclesiastical form." End quote. So, the first thing, he says the theocratic kingdom is present only in the redemptive task of the church. Well, the first problem is kings in their kingdoms is the civil realm. King is a political position. It is a civil position. We have Christ as prophet, priest, and king. He is the high priest of the church, and I would say that's a categorical fallacy in that he is applying the kingdom, the kingship of Christ, in the church entity rather than where it should be. Secondly, labor for the kingdom must not place an equal importance on ecclesiastical and civil matters. We are to take back dominion of the earth that we lost in the fall through the gospel, through spreading the kingdom of God. Christ is taking back what was lost in the Garden of Eden. Adam lost it, Christ is taking it back. Okay? Then he goes on, the church and its task is the exclusive focus of kingdom endeavor in this age. Well, the kingdom endeavors is discipling the nations. Nations are the recipient of the Great Commission. That's the civil aspect of it. And he says, well, we should have a proper focus, and that focus should be on the church. Well, the focus, the recipient of the kingdom should be the nations being correctly instructed on what Christ said. And lastly, the theocratic kingdom is now present, but not in visible or political form. So he admits to an already not yet. The kingdom is here, but it has not been culminated.
Right, which Christ hasn't come back yet, so it hasn't been fully culminated.
Right.
So.
But if it's present, which he says it's present, but it's not present in visible or political form. So in what way is it present? I mean, I think I'm pitting his theology against itself. He's saying it's here, but a kingdom should affect the civil realm because the kingdom is the civil aspect of it. And he's saying it's not. So there again, his theology is getting in the way of his application.
Right. And I would say Christians being involved in the civil realm doesn't negate the ultimate importance of sharing the gospel and seeing people come to Christ and repent and believe and get saved. I mean, that is the ultimate importance. But when that happens, the gospel isn't just like, okay, one-time conversion, get out of hell free card. No, it affects every area of your life. So I almost hear that as like a false dichotomy. Like, why are you pitting those against each other? Yes, the gospel is the most important thing, but that affects every area of your life. So,
Yeah. And he ends the chapter by saying, thus there should be no expectation that in the coming kingdom the judicial laws of Israel would receive the exact and literal application. How much less is such an application appropriate to the unconverted Gentile kingdoms? There again, he's implementing the Gentile kingdoms. And we've addressed this fallacy before. John the Baptist goes. I think Jeremiah rebukes Gentile nations throughout the Old Testament. They're going to it. But to put into practice his theology is to say that John the Baptist lost his life for nothing. And that seems to be a bit of a problem. On page 176, seems to be an interesting page. Yeah. 176. He says they contained a transcendent moral element. It should be noted that affirming the moral element in judicial law does not make the law itself moral law. So here he's admitting that the moral law or the judicial laws contain an aspect of the moral law, but that doesn't mean that the law itself moral law. That doesn't make any sense. The judicial law contains an element of the moral law, but that doesn't make it moral law. Well, if it's moral law, it's moral law. He even goes on to say that the judicial commandments of the Old Covenant were quite strict and burdensome. Now, doesn't that go against the psalmist when he says, "Your yoke is light, your burden is light"? That's completely contrary to Scripture, and that's referring to the Old Covenant laws. I'm surprised that he would come out and just make that claim instantly.
well, the law became burdensome when, the Pharisees and Sadducees would add extra biblical laws on top of God's law. So Jesus, when he says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, and Jesus is the fulfillment of the law, right? He fulfills it. He doesn't take it away. He just fulfills it. He was saying that because, again, the religious leaders of that time added on to God's law. They weren't even following God's law properly. So that's why it was burdensome. God's law in itself is not burdensome. It was burdensome because the religious leaders were adding on to the law.
Right. And here, Waldron clearly says that the law is burdensome. The Old Testament laws are burdensome. Right there on page 176, it is burdensome. They were strict. It's burdensome. On top of, just because there's a moral aspect that is transcendental in the judicial law doesn't make it moral law. That doesn't make any sense. The other thing is let's get into the other aspect. Let's look at Hicks a little bit. 122. he says the moral law is the basis of many judicial laws. In general, the general equity of the moral law is the basis for many judicial laws. Well, that's what we're arguing for, is the moral basis of the judicial law. And Bonson, in his book, picks out what he calls the cultural expressions of those laws, which are not, they're cultural expressions. They're not based off of the moral law. They're not universal. They're specific to the Israeli or the nation of Israel, their culture, or the Hebrew people's culture.
To give an example of that.
The law of Jubilee, not sowing fields with different kinds of seeds. So we keep, that is the cultural expression of that law. So the general equity of that law is what we do today, crop rotation. We don't have to have a year Jubilee if we rotate our crops. We don't have to have a year of Jubilee if we put fertilizer that fertilizes that replenishes the ground. As long as you're putting, I guess, Miracle Grow or whatever it is in there to fertilize the ground, you can keep doing it. And so that's the general equity of it. Otherwise, you're going to make a desert because you suck all the nutrients out of the ground. So crop rotations, using different crops that replenish the soil, putting fertilizer on it. That's the general equity of that. Now, the cultural expression is just don't even plant anything for a year.
It would let the land rest and also restore back to a lot of the Israelites who are working in the fields as well. So, I mean,
Indeed.
Maybe you could say another principle behind that is to pay an employee what his or her wages are due.
Indeed.
So.
He also says the general equity of the judicial law was founded upon the law of nature, which is also revealed in the moral law of the Bible, summarized by the Ten Commandments. So he's saying the law of nature is summarized by the Ten Commandments. I don't know. At what point do we even need the law of nature if we have the Ten Commandments at this point? There's a lot of these little things in here that really doesn't make sense to me. So here we go. I'm going to quote Hicks. In summary, the reformed and classical method of finding general equity in the Old Covenant judicial laws, there are three parts. First, the interpreter should look for the law in non-Christian nations. Second, he should look for it in the Ten Commandments. Third, he should look to see if it is repeated in the New Testament. We can affirm the general equity of the particular judicial law if it meets any one of these criteria. First of all, we should look, a Christian nation or theocracy or whatever you want to call it, should look to non-Christian nations to establish civil government. Come on. Really? I'm arguing the law of God.
Or is he saying that find the law in non-Christian nations? I might be confused on what the quote was.
So he says you find general equity in the law if they're enforcing it in non-Christian nations. That doesn't make a lick of sense. It just doesn't.
Yeah, that probably needs some more clarity because I
would say it doesn't need more clarity. He's confused. He's just talking out of his rear end at this point. Second, you can find general equity. He should look for it in the Ten Commandments. I mean, that's okay. I agree with that. Third, he should look to see if it's repeated in the New Testament. I agree with that as well. But the problem is, bestiality is not repeated in the New Testament. Now, he would probably say, well, it comes under fornication. But you don't know it's fornication if you get rid of the Old Testament law. And I've met New Covenant theologians that have said that a pastor would not be subject to church discipline if he engaged in bestiality. That's nuts. I don't even know if you want to go there. Second, tithing. Tithing is nowhere in the New Testament. Now, giving is, but tithing is different. So I guess you don't have to tithe anymore, according to him. But that was his criteria for finding the general equity. That first one's a doozy. He looked at unbelieving nations to find the general equity of the law of God. You think unbelievers care about the law of God, the general equity of the law of God?
No, they don't care about it, but it is imprinted on each person's heart. Like, it's wrong to kill another human being. That's the whole point of Paul in Romans 1. The law of God has been written on each human being's heart. Now, whether they repent, that's why you need special revelation in the gospel to change people's hearts. But
what's interesting is he quotes Tertullian.
Early church father. Yeah.
Yep. 206. I quote, "When Roman laws are preferred to Mosaic laws." Now, that's not Mosaic laws. That's not Moses' law. That's the problem. That's God's law given through Moses. So he believes that some Roman laws are preferable to God's law. That's beyond me. I don't understand how you can get there. Did they hate the law of God that much that they would just blatantly contradict themselves? Non-Christian nations. But there's much more here. So Hicks, the very last page, I'm going to quote him. He agrees with Tertullian. Roman or Greek law may be superior because it is more suitable than the law of God. But what can I say? Why don't he study Roman law instead of the law of God? Why is he a theologian? Why is he preaching from the law of God? Why is he preaching from the Bible? He needs to be preaching from, the Code of Hammurabi or somebody else. If it's more preferable than the law of God, that's beyond me. I don't. Do I need to say anything else? I mean, he just says it right there. He hates the law of God so much that he prefers Roman or Greek law. It's superior than God's law in the civil realm. Can you even be more obvious? I don't know. Maybe we can send this to some of the folks in G3 and see what they have to say.
Well, I don't know about that. I think we should wrap it up and give people some practical tips and how this was a lot of theology. This was a lot of information. So how do you now basically put your faith into action in the civil realm? What would you say?
Christ is king. We should use the general equity of the law of God to implement that in the civil realm and influence your legislators back to the law of God. Most of the people call themselves Christians. Have that hard conversation with them. Why do you call Christ Lord, Lord? You don't do what he says to do in the civil realm. Be like Nathan, be like John the Baptist. Go to the king, go to the civil realm, go to the legislators and encourage them to legislate laws that are in line with biblical principles.
Right, and an example of that in the state of Georgia, we had a bill this past session that was introduced that would treat abortion as murder in our state and actually abolish it. And I remember talking to my state rep multiple times. You know, he says he's a Christian. Not going to call him out by name or anything, but you know, he was just kind of wavering. And the bill was in his committee, so he could give it a hearing in his committee. And he did ultimately do that after crossover day. So it was like, well, he still gave it a hearing. But again, you know, I'm so grateful to the Lord that in his providence, I had opportunities to talk to my state rep and encourage him, you need to give this bill a hearing. But in reality, you know, I was kind of thinking I shouldn't even have had to encourage him to do that. If he says he's a Christian and he has a bill that would treat abortion as murder, you know, there's over 30,000 abortions that happen every year in our state, in Georgia. He should have just done it, gave the bill a hearing, but he needed the encouragement, I guess. So there's a practical example that happened recently in Georgia. So.
Excellent. So thank you for joining us. This has been a Gentleman's Review, bringing you the news that the mainstream propaganda does not. And thanks for joining me, Brooke. And we'll see you next time. So please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.